No, it's not an actual studio. It's just the name of the ensemble. But yeah, it's a big step forward in my career.
Well, I'm so glad you figured it out. It's a nasty business, I am sure. Oh, hey, are you going to tell them about your game this week? Huh? Living up to your title?
What I scored a 93-yard touchdown.
School record, school record, school record.
That's true.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, it's Division III. It's Carlton football. It's not even Division II. It's Division III.
That was a brutal takedown of D3 football. Oh, ho, 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 ho. Welcome to the Cinema Psych Podcast, the podcast where psychology meets film. I am your host, Dr. Alex Swan, and today we are going to play a little music. No, I'm kidding. I'm probably going to have some clips of some music, but mostly it's about the dialogue. We're talking Whiplash, the Damien Chazelle writer-director piece about a young drummer, promising, enrolled at a conservatory, who is subjected to a super ruthless guy who only wants to win the jazz competitions. Yes, the jazz flute for all my Anchorman fans out there. Yeah, so he just wants to win the jazz competitions, and he needs to have a drummer that is amazing. Not quite my tempo. Yes, I'm talking about that Whiplash. So this movie stars Miles Teller as Andrew Neiman, the up-and-coming and promising young drummer. 19, 18, something like that. Just new at this conservatory, a college, if you will, a learning center for musicians. And the teacher that I'm talking about is a man by the name of Fletcher, who's played by the inimitable J.K. Simmons. So good in this role, so terrible of a human being. Terrible human being. Says the worst things to people. He gets his comeuppance, I guess. So, of course, some spoilers here, as we do on the show. Some comeuppance. Maybe he gets fired from his job toward the end of the movie, and he tries to get something on Andrew Neiman in the performance at the end. But is it a setup? Is it not a setup? Does Neiman show Fletcher that he is awesome? We're going to get into all of that in this episode. A couple of other stars that have smaller roles. Melissa Benoist, who you might know as the most recent Supergirl. Not the movie Supergirl, the TV show that was on a couple of years ago, and then it ran for 6 years or something like that. She plays a love interest by the name of Nicole, and she is kind of awkward in this movie, plays a little bit of one-dimensional, and Andrew's character kind of just gets rid of her sort of halfway through, then wants to connect with her, and she's already dating some other guy. It's weird. Not a great role. I think Damien Chazelle included this character to give Miles a choice on what he wants to do with his life. Does he want to be the best jazz drummer ever, or does he want to have the typical experience with dating, in college, right? And then Paul Reiser plays Jim Neiman, who is Andrew's dad, and Andrew's dad has a love of movies, loves popcorn, loves watching his movies with his son, which I love to do. So there's a great parallel there in this movie. But unfortunately, he loves Raisinets. And I'm going to have to say that that's a knock against Paul Reiser's character. I don't do anything with raisins. So there you go. There are no other big names, some bit roles here and there. There's a great scene with the Neimans meeting with an aunt and uncle and two cousins who are big sports guys, and there's this interesting scene and that I played at the cold open, where there's a tussle of ideologies, we'll say, sports in college versus music in college, that kind of thing. Great takedown by Miles Teller on D3 football, I have to tell you. As somebody who works at a college where D3 football is pretty big, I thought it was hilarious because it's always a struggle between academics and arts versus sports. It's a big struggle. But there's not much to the rest of the characters. It's really Andrew versus Fletcher in this movie, and a lot of drums. There are a lot of drums, and Miles Teller actually played these drums. He learned how to play these drums, and it is amazing. The movie won 3 Oscars, mostly for, J.K. Simmons. He won the Best Supporting Actor, and then editing won, and then sound mixing also won. So those are the 3. But really, the tour de force in this movie is J.K. Simmons, 100%. While Damien Chazelle got nominated for writing, and it was nominated for Best Picture, didn't win those because, of course, it's J.K. Simmons. It's his movie, right? It's obviously his movie. And the last thing I want to mention is that the film title, Whiplash, is actually based on a real song by Hank Levy. Actually, I believe all of the music in the movie, at least the ones they play diegetically as part of the jazz ensemble, is music that exists, which I think is really cool. And then you can also get the soundtrack, of course. So, it's an interesting look at all of the jazz and what it takes to be a jazz artist, I suppose. But really, and what this film is classified as a psychological drama, we are going to get into all of this with a very exciting guest, somebody who has a ton of experience in narcissism and the related clinical pathology. So let's jump right in. My guest host today is Dr. Simon Rogoff. Simon is a senior clinical psychologist in London, specializing in the treatment and theory of personality disorders. He leads a program in a community setting in the UK National Health Service. Previously, he has worked in a medium secure forensic psychiatric unit. I honestly wish we had more time to talk about that. And also rough sleepers with similar kinds of mental health problems. Simon, welcome to the show.
Hello, Alex. It's great to see you.
Simon, you came to my attention, messaging me on what I still call Twitter, and so we connected through there. but I find your work very fascinating. So could you explain to the listeners just a little bit more about your connection to clinical psychology, personality theory, and what kinds of stuff that you do in the science communication space?
Yeah, so I work in a service in London for people with difficulties associated with the diagnosis of personality disorder.
Mm-hmm.
I've been doing that for some years, and I'm happy to talk about my time in forensic medium security unit if you'd like to drag up some stories from that. I work in a community setting, and we see adults during the day.
Uh-huh.
And what I've been doing for the last year, or almost exactly a year, is writing a blog about narcissism, which I've kind of become more and more interested in. What the mainstream narrative is about, what narcissism is, what kind of thing this is, that is understood in different ways.
Yeah.
And then also, what are the connections between narcissism and celebrity and fame, which is a really neglected aspect of narcissism, because there's kind of a dominant narrative online in self-help books about the controlling, abusive aspects of narcissism, which is very important.
Yeah.
But there are other aspects of narcissism which I'm kind of focusing on.
Okay. And you connect the narcissism stuff on this Substack blog, which we'll certainly link in. And please, when we're heading out, definitely mention that at the end, and I'll link it in the show notes, of course. But in this blog, do you connect characters or just real life people?
What I realized was that there are quite a lot of real life, very, very famous people about which there is a lot written.
Okay.
And of course, I'll never talk about my clients. Confidentiality is very important in the NHS.
Yeah.
But here there are people with multiple books written about their lives, with some really quite dramatic stories and lots of detail. And so I'm taking a simple theory about what narcissism is and what causes it. And the theory makes predictions about, well, what might we find in the childhoods of these people? I'm talking about Elvis Presley. I'm talking about Marilyn Monroe. And so it's not a sophisticated thing, really, to go to buy some secondhand biographies and look in the childhood section and say, well, does it stand out? And we know, most people know about some of these people, that it does stand out. But what I'm doing is comparing it with the specifics of a particular theory of what causes narcissism.
Yes, and we'll get into that.
Yeah.
Particular theory here in just a moment, because I'm interested in hearing more about that as someone on the outside looking in to most things about clinical psychology. I teach the basics, of course. I teach, about anxiety, depression, a little bit of psychotic disorders here and there, but the basic stuff we don't get in. I don't teach any class where I get into any of the weeds about narcissism. So I'm going to act as a bit of the audience here when you talk about this theory, to make it very clear the distinctions that this particular theory that you've brought to us today, and how that meshes with sort of, I don't want to say contradicts, but has differences with what lay audiences might know about narcissism, because the name that rolls off the tongue when we talk about real life narcissists is Donald Trump, right? And I'm sure, unfortunately for Britons, that they hear about Donald Trump far more than they actually want to. It's like, he's not even in our country.
We're hearing about him a lot. I feel like I have to vote myself. I'm going to be disappointed when I realize, hey, I don't have a vote.
Right. Don't worry. We're all disappointed as well. Okay. So let's move into the movie here. So Whiplash, Damien Chazelle's sort of, I guess, intro into his domination last decade as far as the Oscars go, because of La La Land, right? So Whiplash came out in 2014. Two stellar performances, Miles Teller, and of course the Best Supporting winner in J.K. Simmons, right? So I wanted to ask you what your thoughts are on the film in general before we get into this first segment on narcissism. Thoughts in general. What do you think about the movie? Do you like it? Do you dislike it? Why Whiplash?
So when I heard about your blog and I started listening to it, first of all, I was disappointed that Blade Runner was taken, and then secondly, I thought actually
by
I really
a hair
want to watch. And the soundtrack's so much nicer to hear on a podcast. You've got these dreamy synth lines, you've got this cool dialogue. It's a relaxing audio to listen to.
Absolutely,
I've got the soundtrack, but I wanted an excuse to go back to Whiplash because it's been a long time since I've watched it, and for a year I've been writing this blog about narcissism, and I was thinking, wasn't that film really about narcissism? And I went back and watched it, and it really is. It's almost like a textbook, and I really like it, not just because I think it's quite well researched in some way, and I think it's slightly somewhat because it's autobiographical, and Chazelle was a drumming student with a narcissistic drumming teacher, but I don't know the details about that. Apparently it was a short film first and won an award, but it doesn't show, there's no baggage, there's no wasted time at all.
Absolutely
in this
not.
film.
Yeah.
And there's one scene that looks completely incidental, and it's about 4 seconds long. And I realized I could write a blog post, and I might do, about those 4 seconds. It's a bit like the student's watching his teacher down a long way away down a corridor, speaking really kindly to a little girl. And then it's like there's no implication to it in the film, but if you wanted to write a textbook, you'd need that section. It's kind of like, it's a really clever film, but I like it stylistically as well. I like it because it's dark, it's heavily psychological, and it doesn't try too hard. It doesn't try to be too many different kinds of film. It's kind of minimalist. There's a lot of face shots. There's a lot of there's not much color. There's a lot of black, and and also because it uses music and soundtrack really heavily to tell the story. And I love a film where the soundtrack is really dominant and where the film relies on the soundtrack a lot.
Yeah, one thing that I noted is that it's very seamless between the soundtrack that is just part of the background versus the diegetic music that's being actually played in the movie.
Is that the word for it?
Diegetic music. Yeah, it's very seamless. And I appreciate when it's seamless like that, because it is an incredible set of sounds. You don't hear a lot of high tempo jazz in movies very often, especially high tempo jazz that relies heavily on drums. And we hear a lot of drums in this movie.
That's what I was thinking. I thought, okay, if the fans of this podcast will be getting used to the nice dreamy synth lines of Blade Runner, and then they get machine gun drumming in the next one.
And you got to give props to Miles Teller learning how to play these drums like he did, and getting sweaty and all of that. It's really good. If you haven't seen it, listener, I do recommend it. Our discussion today will probably give you a deeper understanding as you watch it. For those of you who have seen it and who are like, oh my gosh, J.K. Simmons as Fletcher is just an awful human being. Well, you're going to find out right now what we mean by that. And so let's take the narcissism angle as we jump into this first segment.
All right, gang, Whiplash. Little under tempo, okay? Neiman, just do your best. There we go. 5, 6, and... Little trouble there. Let's pick it up at 17. Ready? 5, 6, and. Not quite my tempo. Here we go. 5, 6, and. Downbeat on 18. Okay, here we go. 5, 6, and. Bar 17, the and of 4. Got it? 5, 6, 7. Not quite my tempo. It's all good. No worries. Here we go. 5, 6, 7. You're rushing. Here we go. Ready? Okay. 5, 6, and. Dragging just a hair. Wait for my cue. 5, 6, 7. Rushing. 5, 6, and. Dragging. 5, 6, and. Why do you suppose I just hurled a chair at your head, Neiman?
I don't know.
Sure you do.
The tempo?
Were you rushing or were you dragging?
I don't know.
Start counting.
5, 6, 7.
In 4, damn it! Look at me!
1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3.
Now, was I rushing or was I dragging?
I don't know.
Count again.
1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Rushing or dragging?
Rushing.
So you do know the difference! If you deliberately sabotage my band, I will you like a pig. Now, are you a rusher or are you a dragger? Or are you gonna be on my fucking time?
I'm gonna be on your time.
And I assume that when you hear the word narcissism, Simon, you have a particular idea in your head about what that means when you apply it to a person. So what I'd like is your idea of what that is, and then let's apply it to the character I think that everyone should know is the narcissist in the film. So what is your basic definition of narcissism in this theorizing that you use as your framework for discussing it?
Yeah, so what I would say is, as a kind of snappy definition that I like, is that narcissism is a set of strategies that takes up power and idealization, and also a stance of judgment in order to avoid feelings associated with powerlessness, shame, and vulnerability.
So if I were to understand, if I understand you correctly, the idea here is that the narcissist, this broad quote unquote narcissist, does not want to feel the negative feelings associated with powerlessness, shame, and self-doubt, and all of the other things, and being vulnerable, and so develops these strategies so that it prevents them from feeling those feelings.
Exactly. So we could call it a kind of emotional avoidance. I like to call it a phobia of vulnerability as a kind of just a really snappy. If you want if your priority in life is to avoid any feelings that make you feel vulnerable, then that will take you into roles where there is power, where you are admired, where someone else is vulnerable. And so we find ourselves in particular kinds of roles, behaving in particular kinds of ways.
Okay. And this differs from I guess maybe a classical definition of narcissism in what ways?
Well, I'm not sure that it differs much from a classical definition of narcissism. I think it differs from the kind of the mainstream definition of narcissism is narrowed. So because people need help in controlling relationships, there's a focus on those aspects of narcissism where the quote unquote narcissist is being controlling, shaming, exploitative.
Gotcha.
But if you want to, so that's important, but it's a bit broader than that. If you want to avoid vulnerability, you can also be the most famous person on the planet, and nobody's a victim but straight away. You might become a victim yourself eventually, because it's very difficult to maintain. But so there are other faces of narcissism that are more admired, idealized, performing, and that's what I'm kind of interested in my blog.
I see. So to sort of contrast the these ideas where the mainstream idea of narcissism is kind of focused more on the behaviors that can be observed by maybe the person on the receiving end, or an impartial observer that they can then use to help that interpersonal conflict. Whereas what you're saying is that those behaviors that are observable by other people are just manifestations of the internal conflict of not wanting to feel these negative feelings.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there's a spectrum, and there's I think there is, healthy narcissism. The narcissism becomes problematic when you can only do that, when you can only take up those kind of strategies of being powerful, being impressive, performing, because you might be, I don't know, Joe Biden, but at some point, your child's upset, and you have to choose a different strategy. Otherwise, your child's not going to be experiencing you as a very helpful father.
Sure.
That's probably very complicated. I shouldn't have mentioned Joe Biden, because the father-child thing is, I know there's a lot.
You're specifically referencing the issues with Hunter?
Well, I wasn't even thinking about that, but yeah, as I said it, I thought, I'm getting into deep water here. A father, a hypothetical father,
sure,
who you could be, I don't know, you could be a policeman and take up a very powerful performing role on the streets, and then go home and be versatile and pick up some different strategies because your child or your partner's upset, or you just you want to engage in intimate emotional intimacy and vulnerability with another human being. So most of us have enough versatility that we don't get into trouble. So narcissism, taking up these kind of strategies, if you have other strategies, is not a problem, because you only take them up when they're helpful. The problem with some leaders, and actually when I look at it, a number of very famous icons, is they can only take up those strategies.
Yeah.
And when Elvis Presley's wife wants to be in an intimate, an emotionally intimate, sustained relationship, with a child as well, it's just not an option.
I see. And that brings us, I think, to the character of this film that expresses these aspects that you just described, right? These strategies. Who is that character in this movie, Simon?
Well, there's two characters, isn't there? Because this is the interesting thing. So we have the almost stereotypical narcissistic man, Fletcher, who is a drumming teacher who develops an emotionally and physically abusive relationship with his students.
Oh, yeah.
And so he, in some ways, he's the perpetrator narcissist, as I would say.
Okay.
But there is also this film later on in the film where he's just sitting at the piano performing in a jazz club, and he is the admired performing face of narcissism as well.
Okay.
Which is why I think the film is really interesting. I wasn't thinking about this when I picked it, but it has both these faces of narcissism, the performing, idealized, admired way of avoiding vulnerability and shame, and the controlling, abusive way of avoiding vulnerability and locating shame in the other person.
And so you said two people. So am I to take that as you think that Andrew, our main character, is also expressing some of these strategies? Yeah,
the relationship isn't as stereotypical as it first appears, because we like to think of the perpetrator and the victim, and we like to divide relationships in that way.
Sure.
And initially, this relationship looks that simple. And
Mm-hmm.
in many ways, it is that simple. One is the perpetrator and one is the victim. But Andrew is not without narcissism.
Okay.
He wants to be the best drummer in the world.
He does.
He will put that before relationships.
Mm-hmm.
He's relationships are on the shelf. He's going to come back to them when he can impress a woman because he's the best drummer in the world.
Okay.
And so there is a hint of a narcissistic strategies in him.
Okay.
And in some ways, the promise that keeps him in this abusive relationship is the promise that you will be the best and everybody will look up to you.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And that is a narcissistic promise. And I don't want to jump to the last scene of the film straight away. But there is a question. There's a question that I asked myself from the beginning of the film, really, here's an abusive relationship. Is he going to, there's kind of three outcomes. Is he going to walk away and say, this is not a good relationship?
Mm-hmm.
Is he going to find some power in the relationship and make the relationship a better relationship?
Mm-hmm.
In other words, level it up. Or is he going to become the new narcissist? Is he just going to be groomed to be like his tutor and become the next great narcissistic drummer? So there are those three potential outcomes from a psychological point of view.
I think that's an interesting thing. I want to put that in our second segment because I think that goes along with how you subtly view Andrew's character as he is trying to maintain his motivation for that goal. But I think for this segment, I do just want to focus on Fletcher because, of course, J.K. Simmons won awards for this performance, and for anyone who has been in any kind of abusive relationship, this is a stinger, right? This not only does Fletcher engage in physical violence, like actual direct physical violence. He slaps Andrew in the face. He engages in hostile verbal aggression by yelling at his students, by calling them names, belittling them, these kinds of things. And then he also engages in indirect physical violence. The first time Andrew gets a shot in advanced or whatever the jazz studio class technically is called, I don't remember off the top of my head. He throws a chair.
Studio band, I think.
Studio band, okay. He throws the chair, right? He throws the chair knowing that it's not going to hit anybody, but that's not the point, right? The point is to create the threat of additional violence. And then, of course, he follows it up by slapping in the face and getting in his face and, are you upset? And making him cry and, go through all of that. So not only is, as we've established here, a narcissist, but he's also an extremely aggressive and abusive person. So I think that's incredibly important to state as part of the overall narcissism. Would you agree?
Yeah. His behavior is abusive.
Now, this one really upsets me. We have an out-of-tune player here. Before I continue, would that player care to identify himself? No? Okay, maybe a bug flew in my ear. 115. 5, 6, and... No? My ears are fine. We definitely have an out-of-tune player. Whoever it is, this is your last chance. And there it went. Now, either you are deliberately playing out of tune and sabotaging my band, or you don't know you're out of tune, which I'm afraid is even worse. Reads 5, 6, and... Bones. 5, 6, and... He's here. Tell me it's not you, Elmer Fudd. It's okay. Play. Do you think you're out of tune? What are you... There's no Mars bar down there. What are you looking at? Look up here. Look at me. Do you think you're out of tune?
Yes.
Then why the didn't you say so? I've carried your fat ass for too long, Metz. I'm not going to have you cost us a competition because your mind's on a Happy Meal instead of on pitch. Jackson, congratulations, you're fourth chair. Metz, why are you still sitting there? Get the out! For the record, Metz wasn't out of tune. You were, Erickson. But he didn't know, and that's bad enough.
We can understand that as a kind of phobia of vulnerability that Andrew has to be vulnerable. He has to be crying. He has to be, to say that he's upset.
Right.
Has to be flinching and on guard, anxious, scared. But yeah, Fletcher he's an adult. He's responsible for his behavior and he's being abusive.
So what are some particular moments in the movie where Fletcher really fits this narcissism mold that you've described?
Well, you've named some of them. So there's the kind of belittling, shaming, a pattern of persistently putting other people in a kind of embarrassed, devalued, shamed position. Is a classic narcissistic strategy that would be described in most textbooks. There's another strategy of narcissism which we don't see, but it's kind of implied, which is we don't see his life, do we? He just turns up at the school, and we don't know what his personal relationships are. But there's a aspect of narcissism which is a distance, an emotional distance, a neglect of other people's emotions and relationship with other people, and also what gets forgotten, partly because it's not very visible, is the neglect of their own emotional needs as well. They're so distanced. They're distanced from emotion, whether it's other people's and the lack of empathy, or from their own emotions. And so, although narcissists can look like they're serving themselves and putting themselves first, actually emotionally they are self-neglecting and will put themselves through experiences that might kind of just deplete their mental health over time because their need for comfort, for relationship is just not being met.
So I want to bring up the final scene because you did a couple of minutes ago. So the final sequence, I guess the climax, the main climax of the film, conflict and then resolution, right? We have actually, let's back up, right? You had mentioned that that Andrew, after some additional things happen in the movie, Fletcher gets fired from his job. It was supposed to be anonymous, all of that, blah, blah, blah. Andrew goes to a club, a jazz club, finds Fletcher playing the piano. They spot each other. They have a drink. And at this drink, at this meeting, Fletcher's explaining all of these things about finding the next great jazz drummer, right? Buddy Rich, we'll say. And he tells this tale, and I think it'll speak to our upcoming discussion about Andrew's motivations and his quest for perfection. But he tells this tale that Andrew gobbles up. It's just like, yes, this is amazing. And then ends with, hey, I'm doing this thing and I need a really good drummer. Do you want to come and do it?
Yeah.
And then we find out as Andrew prepares, knows all of the songs because they were the songs from the previous semester, like Whiplash, roll credits. There's the title, right? But it turns out that what it appears to be is that Fletcher set up Andrew because it's in a completely different set list as they're on stage, right? So I want to get your thoughts on this scene because you had asked a question in an email and I wanted to save our broad discussion of this for the actual recording. So what are your thoughts on the build up and then what may be apparent here, and then how does this feed Fletcher's narcissism?
Yeah, so he walks into this gig and Fletcher's just, we see a different Fletcher, and what is one thing that I noticed, if we don't know anything about this guy's great. He's playing this really nice piece of jazz on a piano. He's got a band. He's a team player, and it's one side of him, but in a way we could say he's psychologically kind of stabilized in that situation because he's being admired.
Yeah,
he's on a pedestal. That he's
okay.
He's in the idealized, admired, performing place, which is fine if you're narcissistic, because you're far away from vulnerability and shame. So that's where it starts. And I also, the other thing about this scene, because they sit down at the table at the end of the gig, and it's like, oh, how have you been? And Andrew thinks Fletcher doesn't know that he what's the word? Dobbed him in.
Yeah, right.
Made a statement about his abuse.
Right.
And I got to thinking, this whole film is a bit, if you take out the drumsticks, it could be about a sexual relationship.
Oh, absolutely.
And the same stages might go through. And here's are they going to get back together or not?
Yeah.
And is he going to fall for it again?
Yeah.
Or has Fletcher changed? Has he gone off and had some therapy? Has the injury of being taken out of that school, losing his role, losing all the things that make him admired and in control and give him license to abuse, he's been taken down, he's been humiliated, he's been shamed, which is the worst place to be for somebody who's narcissistic, because that's their phobia. That's like, you go to an arachnophobe and you give them a big tarantula. That he needs to get away from that. What's happened? Has he gone to therapy? Has he said, look, I need to make friends with spiders. I need to make friends with shame and humiliation so that I can deal with it a little bit. I don't want to be humiliated every day, but we need to be able to deal with a little bit of vulnerability and a little bit of shame in our lives, because they're not terrible things. They're there for a reason. Has he had therapy? Has he changed? Has he humbled himself? And it's ambiguous.
Yeah.
Because he's like, things are going okay, and you think, okay, are you being an ordinary person now? But actually, he's playing a long game, isn't he? And
that's what it seems like. Yeah, for sure.
And I thought it'd been years since I'd seen the film previously. Andrew's kind of listening to him, and you see Andrew he's skeptical. He gives him a really testing question. He says, but is there a line where you cross? And he's basically saying, is it okay to abuse to achieve these ends? Is there a line that crosses too far? Somebody is dead at this point.
Right.
Somebody has committed suicide. And the answers, he doesn't give a very clear answer, but it's still ambiguous.
Right.
And so we go in, he invites him to come and play this gig. And again, I kind of watched it and I thought, no, look, you're in this really high stakes game where you had to commit more and more to try and get to this promise of this narcissistic goal of being the best drummer on the planet. And it crashed down. You were breaking the speed limit. You crashed a car. I'm spoiling all the film now. You put relationships on hold. You abandoned all of that. You bled for this dream, and it was a massive disappointment. And you came out of it with no relationship, no career to speak of. You had to start again. And are you really going to go back on another date, as it were, with this guy? Do you really have enough information to tell you that the alarm bells are silenced now. There's no alarm bells at all. But he's convinced, and he's like, what harm could it do? It's just one date kind of thing.
I know these songs.
And but it isn't a date, and he hasn't changed.
No. Yeah, Fletcher hasn't changed.
I don't know if you heard, I'm not at Schaefer anymore.
Yeah, I did hear that. Did you quit?
Not exactly. Some parents got a kid from Sean Casey's here, I think, to say some things about me. Although why anybody would have anything other than peaches and cream to say about me is a mystery. That's a good laugh, right?
I'm sorry.
No, listen, hey,
I'm sorry.
I get it. I know I made enemies. I'm conducting a little low. They brought back the JVC Fest this year. They got me opening in a couple of weeks with a pro band.
That's great.
Yeah, it's all right. Truth is, I don't think people understood what it was I was doing at Schaefer. I wasn't there to conduct. You moron can wave his arms and keep people in tempo. I was there to push people beyond what's expected of them. I believe that is an absolute necessity. Otherwise, we're depriving the world of the next Louis Armstrong, the next Charlie Parker. I told you that story about how Charlie Parker became Charlie Parker, right?
Yeah, Joe Jones threw a cymbal at his head.
Exactly. Parker's a young kid, pretty good on the sax, gets up to play at a cutting session, and he fucks it up. And Jones nearly decapitates him for it. And he's laughed off stage. Cries himself to sleep that night, but the next morning, what does he do? He practices. And he practices and he practices with one goal in mind, never to be laughed at again. And a year later, he goes back to the Reno, and he steps up on that stage and he plays the best motherfucking solo the world has ever heard. So imagine if Jones had just said, well, that's okay, Charlie. That was all right. Good job. And Charlie thinks to himself, well, shit, I did do a pretty good job. End of story. No bird. That to me is an absolute tragedy. But that's just what the world wants now. People wonder why jazz is dying. I'll tell you, man, and every Starbucks jazz album just proves my point, really. There are no two words in the English language more harmful than good job.
But is there a line? Maybe you go too far and you discourage the next Charlie Parker from ever becoming Charlie Parker?
No, man, no. Because the next Charlie Parker would never be discouraged.
Yeah.
The truth is, Andrew, I never really had a Charlie Parker. But I tried. I actually fucking tried. And that's more than most people ever do. And I will never apologize for how I tried.
So there is a line in the movie right before they go out on stage. Fletcher tells Andrew, I knew it was you. Who you kidding? I knew it was you. I'm paraphrasing, of course. Like he gloats
on stage.
Yeah, he gloats.
You think I'm fucking stupid?
What?
I know it was you.
Because he's now going to humiliate Andrew because he's not going to be able to play the music.
Yeah. And he sets this up as well, doesn't he? Because he says this audience is not just an audience. These are all the people who are in this audience. They have your career in their hands. And
Right.
He says they will never forget this performance. And you think, wow, this is leading up to this great, triumphant performance. And it's not, because he's got a secret plan, hasn't he? That he's setting up this gig to be complete humiliation of the man who has shamed him.
Yeah. But then I want to get your sense of what happens after Andrew walks off stage, right? Because he doesn't want to get humiliated. He doesn't know the set list. But then he goes off stage and takes a beat while Fletcher is kind of being like, oh, well, don't know what happened there. Sorry about that, folks. Kind of buying some time. And then Andrew comes back out on stage, grabs the drumsticks, and then just starts playing. And then there's a shift in Fletcher. What's happening there?
Yeah. And there's something else that happens when he walks off stage, I think, isn't there?
Hey, I think at some point he says something to his dad, or his dad says something to him. Yeah.
But his dad is this interesting figure in the film because for two reasons. First of all, his dad is the solid rock support,
right,
in his life. His dad doesn't have a hint of narcissism about him. So you kind of think, I'm a kind of a nurture rather than nature kind of psychologist, really.
Sure.
So I'm thinking, so where does this ruthless ambition and desperate attention to status and success come from? Because it's not from his dad.
No.
His dad is this like nurturing father. And it's kind of interesting that he goes off and he has this hug with a real non-narcissistic father. And then he comes back. It's almost like he gets recharged with some real authentic kind of, kind of energy that makes him want to do himself justice and look after himself or something.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of, I'm probably making too much of that, but I like that. That he comes back on stage and he's energized, not by renewed ambition or practicing through the night. He's energized by a hug from his real dad.
Yeah.
And he comes back on stage. And as you say, there's this kind of really interesting dynamic. And it's half of the story is told in eye expressions, not even the whole face. It's just shots of the eyes, isn't it? And you have to read what's Fletcher thinking, what's Andrew thinking, what's going on. What is Fletcher switched into a different mode? Is he playing along? Is he going to carry on trying to sabotage him? Is he going to kick him off?
Yeah.
How's he going to take it? And you could see Fletcher. Okay, let's switch back to narcissism. Fletcher has a certain number of cards to play, and he can either go for can I be admired? Can I humiliate? Or something else that keeps my kind of narcissistic defense at bay, if you like. And it kind of goes backwards and forth, doesn't it? And he sees that that they can both win.
Yeah.
I think there's probably different ways of interpreting this, isn't there? But
I like that.
They can play together. They become a band together. And he says, okay, I'm not going to beat you. And there's a risk of me being humiliated. He respects Andrew's capacity to humiliate him. And that's the worst outcome for him.
Maybe second humiliation, technically, right? Because
what's the first?
The first is getting him fired from the Schaefer Conservatory, right? So potentially the second.
And there's he physically attacks him as well before back in the film.
Yes.
After the
humiliation accident. Yeah. So maybe third humiliation. Yeah, indeed. Yeah. The thing that I want to add here regarding Fletcher and his about face on this is and I don't know if this has anything to do with narcissism. This was just my read. This is just my read of the, we'll call it the 180 when Andrews just starts playing drums maniacally, right? Is in the conversation that you mentioned in the bar where they were having a drink and Andrew was like, how you doing? And is there a line? And Fletcher says, no, there's not a line. And he says it because that's not how you get greats. That's not how you get somebody like Buddy Rich. And Fletcher tells Andrew that he has never had a student become a great. And so my take on this was that at that moment, Fletcher realizes that all of the crap that he's done, including this massive deception of changing the set list on purpose because he wanted to get back at Andrew for getting him fired, he realized that, okay, I was right. Fletcher says, I'm in my head, I am right, because there was no line, or if there was a line, I definitely crossed it by publicly humiliating someone. I mean, there are a lot of fates worse than death for quite a few people, and I would say social humiliation ranks as one of those fates worse than death, right? So he was trying to metaphorically murder Andrew on this stage. And Andrew came back and was like, I'm going to take everything you throw at me. And I think at that moment, Fletcher thinks to himself, I finally got my great one.
Because he's a match.
Yeah, it is a clear parallel to the conversation in the bar.
But does Andrew become a kind of a mirror then? That Andrew, rather than defeating him by some other set of strategies, Andrew shows that he can equal Fletcher at being narcissistic or being.
That's a good question. I'll defer to you on that one. I mean, it makes a lot of sense for sure based on how you describe Andrew's ambition, right? So I will gladly yield that understanding it, because I mean it makes sense if we go back to your allegory of an abusive romantic relationship, then the abusee in some manner of speaking, I suppose, becomes the abuser.
Well, they have an option that they can, if powerlessness is completely intolerable and has been experienced in a traumatic way, of course you want power. It's the first thing you want.
Yeah.
But you also have a choice about whether you do that abusively or not.
Okay.
You can become a politician and feel powerful, and you can do some good as long as you control the other aspects of your narcissism. And as long as you can put it down when, your partner wants a chat. I was thinking about these two different explanations you're getting to about the ending so my kind of take is almost that Andrew becomes a match. He's learned from the master, and he can give back now.
Yeah,
as much as Fletcher can give, and they are kind of equals. And if you like, Fletcher can retire knowing that there's another Fletcher. That kind of picture. But say again. So the other take is that. Because I didn't quite get the other option.
My idea is that in their conversation, right? So Fletcher says that there's no line because there's no line to being great, and I have never had a great one. But in this moment, when Andrew comes out and starts playing the drums as fast as I have ever seen, right? That most people see or hear. He realizes, oh, okay, here's my great, and it might be what you're saying with match. I mean, that might be the same. We might be recognizing,
they're not necessarily mutually exclusive,
right? We might be seeing the same stuff in this, but I like, and going back to they've met each other's match, or Fletcher sees his match grow. I mean. It makes a lot of sense, and it makes a lot of sense when you say Andrew also expresses a lot of these narcissistic behaviors or tendencies because he treats the other drummers, the other seats, terribly, right? Especially because he's treated terribly by the first guy, Tanner. But his potential usurper, Connolly, he treats like complete utter garbage, right? So I do see this match.
There's that kind of family dinner table conversation as well.
One of my favorite scenes in the movie.
He's not getting enough. He's not getting enough applause. He's like, "Hey, I'm in the core band," and they're like, "Yeah, anyway." So I was watching TV, and they move on.
I was
and he's like,
playing football, and I scored a touchdown. Like what?
And he has to put them down,
which I think is a funny put down. So I say this. So I said this in the intro, but I work for a college that is Division III. So just in case you're not familiar, Simon, in the U.S., there is the NCAA, the National Collegiate Athletic Association, and then there's a couple of other. There's the NAIA, which is another kind of collegiate sports organization. But anyways, there are 3 levels to your NCAA affiliation. You have Division I, Division II, and Division III. I feel so American describing this to you right now. Division I is what you see all over the TV with like football from like Notre Dame or the Texas, Auburn, Alabama, all of these big state schools that have these massive programs, right? That's Division I. Division II is the next rung down. These are typically regional state schools that don't get as much funding, either from the state or if they're private, that kind of thing. They don't get as much funding, different scholarship rules. And then there's D3. There are no scholarships for D3. You can get sports scholarships, athletic scholarships for Division I and Division II. None for Division III. Division III is basically organized club sports, right? So in the UK, you've got several levels of association football, right? So, and one of those levels is like your club, your Oxford club, or even Cambridge, right? Where soccer may have gotten its start, right? So that's kind of like what Division III is. It's your school's club sports team.
Okay.
And you do play against other schools, but because there are no scholarships, they're not necessarily the most prestigious schools. My college is very small, and so we have D3 sports. But the knock is, in this particular scene, to bring it back to the movie, the knock is that Andrew is going to a conservatory in New York City. I'm sure that's expensive for poor Paul Reiser's, school teacher money, right? And I'm sure he's got a scholarship to go to that conservatory, a music scholarship, which of course is also way more prestigious than going to a college at Division III level. You're talking a college that is not at all in the big names in college sports. And so for a family, two brothers, and then this really American dad talking about a single touchdown, or whatever it was, being cooler than being on studio band, I would. I totally understand where Andrew's coming from in that moment. Because I've been there.
Where were you?
Well, me being the science nerd in the family, and then just seeing, I have a lot of aunts and uncles on my mom's side, which meant a lot of cousins, a lot of cousins that are similar in age to me, and then a lot of older cousins, and then some of them did do well in sports, right? And I have a second cousin, or actually first cousin once removed, who was on the Gonzaga basketball team. And Gonzaga is one of these colleges that go to the Final Four, basically every year. And in the March Madness.
So that's
thing.
prestigious.
Yeah, so it's very prestigious. You know, a lot of athletic stuff and all of that in our culture gets played up, and it's just like, I'm trying to slough off the bitterness here, but it's like, oh, you went and got your PhD. That's nice. Pat on the head. Like, you're smart. It's like, I mean, maybe I'm smart. Maybe I'm just a curious person, and that, you know, that curiosity led me down this path. And
you went with your strengths.
Yeah, I went with my strengths. It doesn't make me any less than somebody who's able to do the sports thing. So yeah, that's where I've been in the conversation, and it makes it extra special because of the Division III comment. Right.
The in joke. American in jokes are safe because there's a lot of Americans that will understand.
Exactly.
And then we Brits are like, okay, I think I get where you come from. But I think that we were talking about. So Andrew is in this. You know, there's two aspects of the story where he kind of he goes for the big prize, and there's this fantasy that when I'm the best drummer in the world, then I will get the girl, and then somehow my relationships and my life will become fulfilling. And this is the lie of narcissism, really.
Yeah.
Because by the time he calls up the girl and says, "Hey, I'm in this really great concert," she's like, "Yeah, I'm not sure my boyfriend wants to come."
Right.
And he's like, "Right, that's she's moved on."
Yeah.
You know? And then he's at the dinner table with family. And this is where this should all come together, and they say, "Great, Andrew, you know, you're going to be in the core band. Wow."
Yeah, that's amazing.
And actually, he's disconnected from the people around him. It doesn't create fulfillment and connection. It actually creates disconnection.
Yeah.
And they're like, "Well, that's very nice for you." And the dad says, "Do you have any friends, Andrew?"
Yeah. His
and
uncle.
it just cuts through because he gets to the nub of it straight away, and that of course humiliates him because it's a sore point.
Yeah, and immediately before this dinner scene, he's obviously back home and he's talking to his dad, and his dad asks him where he got the cuts on his hands, right? And we know as the audience that he's just been drumming his hands raw, which rough, right? But he doesn't tell his dad. He's just like, "Oh, don't worry about it. You know, it's fine. I'm just." And so he's even disconnected from his dad, and we see that even earlier than that when he sees a movie with his dad in a movie theater, which is where he meets this girl previously, and they mix popcorn in their candy, and it happens to be Raisinets. I said my piece about Raisinets. It's the worst. I'm agreement with Andrew here. He's like, I'll eat around them. Oh, you don't like Raisinets? And so it seems like what we're supposed to be getting set up here is that he is also going to start drifting away from his dad.
Because he's got a new dad in a way, hasn't he? Because in that scene in the kitchen before the dinner table, his dad also says something like, "What this guy thinks means a lot to you, doesn't it?"
Mm-hmm.
And he's noticing that, you know, somehow the admiration and approval of Fletcher is a kind of idealized admiration and evaluation.
Yeah.
And that's all that matters. And it in a way, it's not just Fletcher, it's judgment matters. It's not, because it's not his dad's judgment that's competing with Fletcher's judgment of him.
Right.
It's kind of judgment versus acceptance, really, isn't it? His dad offers him love and acceptance and empathy, but he's going for, no, I want to be judged as the guy who is good enough to be Fletcher's. I don't know what was the phrase you used earlier on. You know, I'm going to be the guy who does cut it for Fletcher.
Yeah, is the one, right?
Yeah,
is his, you know, his Neo in the Matrix. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
And so I want to bring the last part of our discussion. I want to bring in some of the things that I noticed in the movie with respect to Andrew, and this new angle that you have here that I didn't actually think too much or think too strongly about, is that Andrew starts becoming this narcissist in and of himself. maybe that stuff was there previously and we just don't know it. But the idea of motivation and the pursuit of perfection, right? Perfectionism, and whether or not Andrew as a character from start to end of the film actually grows as a person, either because of the trials with Fletcher, the trials and tribulations with Fletcher, or in spite of. So, of course, we hear twice in the movie the story of Charlie Parker and the kind of the moment or the idea or sort of apocryphal aspect of Charlie Parker, the great jazz drummer, becoming the icon that he was, right? Joe Jones throws a cymbal at Charlie Parker's head when he made a mistake, and that just kind of prompted Charlie to be better. And of course, we actually see an allegory of that or an imitation of that when Fletcher throws the chair past everyone in band practice. But we hear that story twice. And then the second time, Andrew's like, yeah, you told me about Charlie Parker. Like, I don't need to hear about it anymore. But this story underlies the motivation that we see throughout the movie for Andrew, right? The first scene, the literal first scene of the film is Miles Teller playing the drums. And the final scene of the movie is Miles Teller playing the drums.
On paper, it sounds like a boring film, doesn't it? But that's what I love about this film. It's on paper, it looks like a really, like this film, it cannot be a great film. But the great achievement is that it is. It's a really intense film.
Yeah. And it's got all the things. So it's got all the things associated with this pursuit of perfection, right? So narcissism notwithstanding, there are quite a few people in this world who attempt to get things to be absolutely perfect. And if it can't be perfect, then it's not good. One of the things that I tell my students pretty much every semester, as the semester wanes and we're getting closer and closer to, final grades and everything like that, they're like, I don't know how to start this, or I'm at this paper, or I'm not sure how to study or how to improve on my tests, these sorts of things. And they're just trying to do all of these little things to make them absolutely perfect so that they get top marks, an A, 100 out of 100, whatever it is. And I have to say to them every single time, perfect is the enemy of good. And I think that's what we see in this movie, right? Andrew is trying to be perfect at drums, and it is the enemy of him just maybe extending his time practicing, but becoming better over time.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember the name now. There's a famous psychologist who talked about good enough parenting and the idea of being good enough as opposed to being ideal.
Yeah.
And I guess the question is, we could say, well, what's wrong with kind of abusing yourself a little bit in order to become great? At one point he's practicing and he's bleeding and he's saying something really abusive. And the first time I watched it, I thought, oh, you're now talking to yourself like Fletcher talks to you.
Right.
And then I thought, well, he could just be talking to Fletcher as he's doing it. Like, I'm doing this to get you back, you this, that, and the other. I'm not sure. It's ambiguous, but your question is about what the cost of perfection.
Yeah. So
yeah.
as we see Andrew in this, his motivation is to be Charlie Parker, Buddy Rich, these people. And so his pursuit of perfectionism changes how he interacts, not only with his talent playing the drums. I can't play the drums, but it also how he interacts with other people.
Yeah. And in a way, I'm going to come back to narcissism because, in a way, he's put aside connection and interaction with other people.
Mm-hmm.
He's deprioritizing that. That's not what my life's about. He probably has he still has a need for it, but he denigrates that. He's like, I don't need that. I'm going to perform and I'm going to be great. I'm going to be perfect. I'm going to be the best.
Mm-hmm.
And in the process, he bleeds. He crashes a car. He bangs his head. He gets humiliated, and he loses the girl. And he knew, his relationship with his dad becomes more distant. He loses connection with the people around him, and he strives for this to be above
Mm-hmm.
everyone. And there's a balance. There has to be a balance, isn't there? Because
Yeah.
we want success, but if you leave behind relationship, then there comes a point where the vacuum is so great for, comfort and your own personal needs being met, that you collapse, or worse.
I always come back to, when I'm thinking about this, I always come back to his conversation with the girlfriend at the time, in the coffee shop, where he's breaking up with her.
This is why I don't think that we should be together. And I've thought about it a lot, and this is what's going to happen. Okay, I'm going to keep pursuing what I'm pursuing. And because I'm doing that, it's going to take up more and more of my time, and I'm not going to be able to spend as much time with you. And even when I do spend time with you, I'm going to be thinking about drumming. And I'm going to be thinking about jazz music and my charts and all that. And because of that, you're going to start to resent me. And you're going to tell me to ease up on the drumming, spend more time with you because you're not feeling important. And I'm not going to be able to do that. And really, I'm just going to start to resent you for even asking me to stop drumming. And we're just going to start to hate each other. And it's going to be ugly. And so for those reasons, I'd rather just, break it off clean. Because I want to be great.
And you're not.
I want to be one of the greats.
And I would stop you from doing that.
Yeah.
You know I would stop you from doing that. You know that for a fact.
Yes.
And I'd barely see you anyway.
Yeah.
And when I did see you, you treat me like shit because I'm just some girl who doesn't know what she wants. And you have a path, and you're going to be great, and I'm going to be forgotten. And therefore, you won't be able to give me the time of day because you have bigger things to pursue.
That's exactly my point.
What the fuck is wrong with you? You're right, we should not be dating.
He basically slippery slopes his entire way through that conversation. He's like, I'm going to tell you right now why I don't think we should be together. And then he just goes this, then this, then this, then this. And like I said, he slippery slopes his way to not only humiliating her, not in the sense that everyone's watching them, but like, why did I even waste my time with this guy if this is literally how he thinks? But then, like, really, and it's very clear at the end when he calls her that she found a rebound pretty darn quick, because that was quite a breakup. I want to be the best drummer, so I'm gonna spend all my time drumming, and when I'm with you, it's going to be worse for you because I'm just going to be spending all my time thinking about drumming when I'm not drumming, and I'm not going to be with you when I am drumming. And so it seems to me that while if you read that on paper, as you've been saying, when you read that, you read that breakup on paper, it's like that actually sounds kind of caring in a way.
Yeah.
But really it doesn't come off like that, right?
It's very well acted. It's very, very kind of, I found it really realistic.
Okay.
She's in terms of a guy who's a bit narcissistic, he's trying to deliver something that requires a bit of emotional connection, really, and him to be soft. And actually he gives her a list of facts in a way, rather than any emotional connection of like recognizing that this is difficult, and there's not really an emotional dimension to what he says. He lists her a number of facts about the future. This is going to happen. This is going to happen, and I need to achieve this. And therefore, there's not really much space for this kind of relationship thing that you want. So this isn't going to work. And she wants connection, and she doesn't want to be something in the future that she's not now. She wants to get to know him and get to know herself. She says like earlier on, she's trying to find out who she is.
Yeah.
She doesn't know that she's going to be this person in
Right.
the future, this Charlie Parker. She's just trying to figure out who she really is.
Yeah. And
Now you can try and figure out your authentic, real self.
yeah.
Or you can try and be some persona in the future. And that's kind of the difference between them, and the difference between narcissism and non-narcissism, really.
And it's quite the contrast too, with how they first converse, because he's like staring at the floor and says that he's not very good at eye contact and everything. And I think she finds that to be charming, quirky, kind of nerdy, goofy kind of way. But I think the icing on the cake at the cherry on the top of the conversation, the breakup conversation, is she says, "What the F is wrong with you?" and walks away, right? Because she's like, I don't get how you can be that singularly focused when that wasn't the guy that I met.
And where am I? She's invisible, isn't she?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely,
she doesn't
invisible.
matter. He can't see her as a person with feelings, really. I think in that scene, and she's hurt. But the difference between her and him is they're probably both hurt, but she can feel it and she can tolerate it.
Okay.
And she can say, actually, there's alarm bells ringing here.
Yeah.
This relationship is hurting me, and F you. I'm going to walk away.
Yeah.
No, she doesn't say F you. She does see that, but she says, what the F is wrong with you?
Right.
So she does make a judgment, and she's kind of on the money for me. And she can tolerate being let down and hurt, and she notices that she's hurt. She walks away, and he is also hurt, we could guess, because actually he needs a relationship as well, deep down inside. But he's cut off from his feelings, and he's in a more intellectual, rational mind of I don't deal with feelings because feelings are vulnerable.
Okay.
So I'm in other spaces. I'm intellectual, cognitive, rational. Yeah. And actually Fletcher also is a really, really good example of this ultra intellectual, where he comes out with these really sharp quips and witty denigrations. They're not just denigrations, they're clever.
Yeah.
And that can come out of narcissism because people are stuck in their intellectual mind, constantly working in that part of their mind to stay away from their emotional mind.
Yeah. His delivery was very reminiscent. Are you familiar with Jimmy Carr?
Yeah.
Yeah. Are you and his particular brand of humor, right?
Yeah.
Very short punchlines. Like he's not a storyteller, stand-up comedian. He does the 1-2 bang bang bang, and his 1-2 is generally really dark. And if you're not familiar with Jimmy Carr, listener, and you like dark humor, please do look up Jimmy Carr. He's one of my favorite British comedians, and I recently watched his most recent Netflix stand-up special, and the kind of laughter that the audience does, and one who might view it, is the ha ha ha, oh, the laugh, and then the oh man, that's rough, right? And those are the kinds of laughs that you give to Fletcher and J.K. Simmons' line delivery of these, right? Because he is so sharp. And 15 years earlier, about 10 years earlier, he was dropping dimes as J. Jonah Jameson, right? And so he kind of has that kind of
J. Jonah Jameson's who? Sorry,
in the Spider-Man movies, the Daily Bugle publisher.
Yeah.
And so, he got some practice as J. Jonah Jameson, and then he becomes this guy. And every time he comes out with a quip, you're like, oh, yikes.
And he gets some personal information about Andrew at the beginning, doesn't he?
Yeah.
About what does your dad do? Oh, he's a writer. What's he written? Is he famous? No. Well, why are you telling me about your dad? Then it's that kind of. And then he stores it, and then when it's time to denigrate Andrew, he says, where's your daddy now? So I can't remember the lines, but he uses those facts.
Yeah.
And it's cruel. But and then he calls one guy mini me, and there's some pretty rude ones.
Yeah, especially with the R word and everything, and
he also played. He was also in the stage production of A Few Good Men, wasn't he? Which is the military guy in the dock, who eventually on film was opposite Tom Cruise as the young lawyer. But it's a very similar character. It's a really narcissistic character,
absolutely,
who's actually, and it's clear in A Few Good Men how his sense of reality is only he just makes up what reality is. Let's not get back to Donald Trump, but yeah. So, but you could see how that role might have prepared him for the Fletcher character.
Yeah. And so so taking all of that, and I think taking all of the film in as a whole, and like I said, the first scene is Miles Teller playing drums, and the last scene is Miles Teller playing drums. Does Andrew grow as a person in this story? Does he gain some resilience in your mind, or does he become the next Fletcher?
Well, the first question is Fletcher resilient? So I think that's the question, because if I think the short answer is I think he becomes the next Fletcher, but then the question is, well, isn't Fletcher the most resilient person on the planet? I mean, look at him. He's all power. He's got a prestigious job. He's admired. He can go and play a nice gig in a pub. He can play in any band he wants to. He's got authority and respect. Isn't that a picture of resilience? What do you think?
Oh, I was waiting for you. No. I don't think he gains what developmental psychologists would consider to be resilience, which is the overcoming of trauma. I think Andrew feeds into that trauma, and I do think that he becomes the next Fletcher, even though I think he does it for himself and not for any kind of external comeuppance to Fletcher, right? Nobody knows in the audience that Fletcher tried to publicly humiliate him, and nobody knows why he walked off the stage and then came back to play his own thing. They probably all think it's part of the show, or So I don't think it was for anything external, but I think what he does is he takes the trauma and is going to be stuck in this loop for the rest of his life.
Yeah. And you said something interesting there. You said he's doing it for himself. And I guess that there's a devil's advocate position that says, well, what's wrong if that's what you want in life, to be the best drummer in the world? Well, maybe you don't care about relationships.
Sure.
Maybe you have no need for vulnerability or emotional connection. What's wrong with just investing in being the best drummer in the world and letting your hands bleed and showing the injuries, the scars that you got getting there? And I think that's fine as long as everyone else is okay with it.
Yeah.
You're not abusing your students,
sure,
and then they're not taking you to court or killing themselves later on in 20 years' time.
Yeah.
But also, really, maybe you do need relationships, and maybe one day you will get quite depressed, or there will be a vacuum. And if there isn't, then great, brilliant. And some people, we could say, probably are different. and they don't have a vacuum,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't need people, maybe.
It
But
may be, yeah.
the hint in this film is, especially if you look at his dad, the mystery is, what was your mum like?
Yeah.
If your dad's this cuddly dad, and you've become this ruthless, I'm going to be the best drummer in the world, even if my fingers fall off.
Maybe mom will come back.
But what was mum like?
But maybe she'll come back. Maybe she's
sequel.
still alive, and he's doing this to get enough recognition
maybe
that she comes back into life. Because the only thing we know is that mom left. Not that mom is dead. Mom left.
No, mum left.
Yeah.
That's the sequel, and it turns out she is the best drummer in the world.
I love it.
That's it'd be an interesting sequel, but the first one started off as a short film. It'd be probably stretching it a bit to make a sequel, wouldn't it?
The one thing that I wanted to add to what you're saying there is to the point that you said about what's wrong with being the best if everyone else is okay with that. I had two things pop into my head as you were saying that. One is another fictional film, and that is Natalie Portman in Black Swan. Yeah. Right, where she wants to be the best dancer in that troupe so she can play the role of the Swan Queen, whatever Swan Lake is about. I don't remember it. But she wants to be the lead dancer, right? And she ends up, due to lots of other things that we're not getting into right now, but she falls in and has a psychotic break and has all of these other things as a true Aronofsky movie will give you. But I think there's similarities there with ambition and trying to cut people out, right? So there is a potential dark side, is what I'm trying to say. The other thing that popped into my head is I think there are some real life parallels with some of the people that we consider to be the best at their profession, right? And of course, we'll stick with musicians because they're the low-hanging fruit here, right? So plenty of musicians who wanted to be the best ended up just finding either the point of a syringe or the bottom of a bottle and could not get out from under there, either lost their lives tragically because of that or just spiraled out of their careers because of that. I mean, we've got like people like Jimi Hendrix or Heath Ledger or the list goes on, obviously, right?
Sid Vicious, yeah.
So I guess what I wanted to add to that is that with these two, one fictional, one, set of real life things, sure, I will concede that there is absolutely no problem with wanting to be the best. But I don't think, as you were saying, you can do it without the input of others and having that strong base of people. But as you are also saying, maybe narcissism keeps those kinds of relationships at arm's length or farther.
Yeah, that's right. And in a way, this is kind of what my blog's about, really, because there's a narrative that develops around iconically famous people that they had a talent, they could sing or they could act.
Yeah.
And the persona grew up around that. They became this distinctive, Elvis would be a good example, or Marilyn Monroe. This persona develops and grows and becomes really distinctive. And actually, when you look at the childhood through a lens of narcissism, there's trauma early on, emotional experiences that mean that before that, they needed to be distanced from their vulnerability and develop a persona before they knew they could sing.
Okay.
And that's, if you don't fix that, it's a ticking time bomb.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So it's not because you had too much money and you bought drugs. You had too much money and you bought drugs because you've got the ticking time bomb, and your feelings are being neglected. Your vulnerability, you can't be vulnerable. You can't sustain relationships. Your actual human needs were put away a long time ago, and that's the ticking time bomb. So in the meantime, because you don't need vulnerability, you grow into this invulnerable, shiny, performing, admired, idealized figure, and you get really good at it, as a lot of these figures do, and you become sharp and intellectual, and you perfect it. But the ticking time bomb's still there, and it was there before. So that's kind of what my blog's really That's what I've kind of found looking at these biographies. So if along the way, the ideal scenario actually is you use that to your advantage, but along the way you heal, you get some help, maybe some just ordinary relationships help you to become friends with vulnerability again, and you can connect, and then you can have the best of both worlds to an extent. I think you can succeed and learn how to connect to other human beings and to connect to yourself along the way. But I don't think it's that common to get the best of both worlds. It's a high stakes game. And once people are gaining the admiration and status, it's difficult not to stay on that, what do you call it? That ride. And there are people who get off the ride and give up. And there are people who manage to stay on the ride and find their vulnerability again and kind of make friends with it. But they probably lose a bit of their edge in the process. And that's difficult sacrifice to make.
Well, I want to thank Dr. Simon Rogoff for joining me to discuss Whiplash. Before we say goodbye, Simon, is there anything that you'd like to plug? I mean, we've been talking about your blog on Substack, so I assume that's where people can find out more about your work.
Thanks, Alex. It's really, really good fun. That's the only thing I have to plug really is my Substack blog, Narcissism, Trauma and Celebrity.
So what is the website?
Those three things. It's on Substack. So if you look for Simon Rogoff or Narcissism, Trauma and Celebrity on Substack, it's not too difficult to find.
Okay.
There's a picture of two celebrities stood side by side, a black and white picture of Sir Winston Churchill and Charles Chaplin stood together. And that, to me, that kind of sums up. If you want to read into it about politics, you can. Right. But I'm talking about Charles Chaplin.
Right.
But the connections are clear.
Was this before or after The Dictator?
Good question. I really want to write a blog post about The Dictator because there's a whole depth to that.
I love that film.
I don't know when the photograph was taken. I think they were at a wedding.
Interesting. Okay.
Charles Chaplin.
I'll have to check that out.
And of course, Chaplin was the funny, innocent, harmless comedian with a similar moustache to Hitler.
Yep.
And he gave a performance basically imitating Hitler, called The Dictator.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the first time he spoke on film, wasn't it?
Yes, it was the first time that he specifically gave dialogue. He had previously in Modern Times sung Smile, but that was dubbed. But yes, and The Dictator was the first time we hear Charlie Chaplin speak.
And if you want to be disillusioned as to the contrast between those two human beings, you can read my post about Charles Chaplin's real life on my Substack.
Indeed.
Because they weren't so dissimilar as he would like to believe.
Right. Well, thanks again, Simon. I really appreciate it. This was a fun conversation.
It's been great. Thanks, Alex.
And that's going to do it for this episode. Until the next one, thanks for listening.